Hello, I'm Mimi Steele, and I started the Bay Area Citizens for Sustainable Liberty. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I'm concerned about the property rights and our liberty, and the threat to freedom in modern-day America. What I'm going to talk about today is the importance of property rights to your liberty, the existential and imminent threat to those rights, and what you can do about it. We're going to talk at the regional level, then we're going to talk at the local level. I'm going to give you some examples of things that are happening in California communities and the implications for your liberty. Let's start with two definitions. First of all, smart growth is an urban planning and transportation theory that concentrates growth in compact, walkable urban centers to avoid sprawl, and it advocates compact, transit-oriented, walkable, bicycle-friendly land use, including neighborhood schools, complete streets, and mixed-use development with a range of housing choices. Sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. Both of those terms sound really great. They sound innocent. A lot of people buy off on those. But the problem is that these terms and the policies that they employ provide us with concern about what's happening to our liberty. So let's talk first about the importance of property rights. Property rights are fundamental to liberty. John Locke, who was one of the philosophical people who started the American Revolution, said the great and chief end of government is the preservation of their property. John Adams said property must be secured or liberty cannot exist. George Washington said private property and freedom are inseparable. They enshrine these concepts in the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution, where no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, or if they're deprived, they must have just compensation. A lot of us had lost sight of that fact, so I want to use a quote from a property rights founder who's been recently involved in this battle, and he says, "Either you have the right to own property or you are property." I contrast the American concept of property with the UN view of property. They say land cannot be controlled by individuals, private land ownership contributes to social injustice, and land is to be used in the interest of society as a whole. So what does this mean to us? On a regional level in California, we have 17 metropolitan planning organizations. In the Bay Area, ours is called ABAG. In Sacramento, it's SACOG. San Diego, down here on the right, has an acronym, and Southern California has an acronym. What you'll find is that even though the acronyms are different, the templates are the same. So I'm going to talk about what's happening in the Bay Area. The Bay Area has two regional organizations that we need to be concerned with. One is called the Association of Bay Area Governments, ABAG, and the other one is the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, MTC. They have come up with a plan called the One Bay Area Plan, or Plan Bay Area. It's a 25-year plan to spend $200 billion. Now, I always say to people, the Soviets only had 5-year plans. What are we doing with a 25-year plan? The purpose of the plan is to provide sustainable development, there's that term again, affordable housing, which is really stack and pack subsidized housing, land use, and mass transit. You can go to onebayarea.org and see the details of the plan here. The plan is presented in two parts as we saw it in the Bay Area. One part is called a visioning session, which is designed to get public input. And the other part is with the MTC and ABAG hearings to discuss the results of those visioning sessions. Let me start with a visioning session for public input.
The Bay Area is my home. I want to have a say in what happens here. How can people like you and me make our wishes known? Welcome to You Choose Bay Area, a way to express the choices you would make to shape the future of our region. In the next few months, regional planning agencies will be deciding how we move people around and where we build. These decisions will impact housing and transportation for the next 2 decades. After you read about some of the issues the Bay Area faces, click on the Priorities tab. Do you care most about conserving open space Or is your top concern less local traffic? Rank these issues that are important to you. Once you've set the priorities, click on the Choices tab. It's time to make two choices: where homes should be built and how neighborhoods will be designed for more people and more jobs. When you've selected your choices, click on Outcomes. On your right, you can see how your priorities make things better or worse than today. On your left, you can see how your choices would translate into benefit or harm to the environment or your pocketbook. After you see your outcome, you may want to go back and change your priorities and choices. Let us know how you would rate your future before you click on Get Involved. By inputting your zip code, we'll know what city matters to you. If you want to get more involved, please enter your email and register for a You Choose forum near you. Thanks for taking this first step. You can choose the future and create a better Bay Area.
Are you uncomfortable with this process, but you can't quite put your finger on it? These are visioning sessions, and what they asked us to do in the visioning sessions was rank 14 priorities by order of choice. I want to focus on 3 of them. They asked us, do we want clean air? How important is that to you? Do you want to conserve open space? Do you want to conserve water? I hope you will notice in these questions that they didn't offer you choices like, how much more clean air do we have than we already have already? What's the definition of open space? Do we want to conserve water, or should we be building more dams? None of these options were presented. The only options that were presented was, how important are these 14 things to you? So this leads me to point out that the reality of smart growth and sustainability is very different than the nice sounding words. I call these the visioning slides that you did not see in the presentation. You can see here Windmill Farm Estates. It's composed of houses stacked on top of each other, mass transit, and windmills. No private automobiles. Everything is within walking distance. Here's another example of a slide you missed. We call this mass housing stack and pack housing. And we did a little cartoon here showing a termite mound with people living in a termite mound. That's the equivalent of what they're trying to do to us. And we actually found the picture that inspired this cartoon, and it shows Zimbabwe actually congratulating themselves on the fact that they have a green building that looks exactly like a termite mound. Welcome to the animal kingdom. Another aspect of smart growth on the slide you didn't see is a thing called traffic calming. Traffic calming is a subtle way, or not so subtle way, of getting you out of your car. They go into city centers, they reduce the numbers of lanes for cars, they put in extra areas of gardens, they put in traffic circles. It makes congestion really bad for the automobiles, and effectively they're trying to nudge you out of your car in the city center. So those are the visioning sessions. Let me talk about the ABAG and MTC hearings to discuss those results. I was quite disturbed when I looked at the documentation for the One Bay Area plan and started looking at the fine print. In the fine print, they have one of their objectives as being equity. Equity is defined in this instance of reducing travel time for low-income people to 19 minutes and reducing their average cost per day to $2.79. Now I ask you, what does equity analysis have to do with transportation? And I also ask you to consider the second and third level questions. For example, do I have to live close to where I work? If my job is too far away, do I have to move? Am I only eligible for a job within a certain radius of my house? Will businesses be restricted to hiring people within a certain radius? Is shopping restricted to my local boutique store that's below where I live? And if it is, how expensive is it going to be for me to shop in a local boutique store as opposed to going to a Walmart or a Costco and getting my groceries? Again, when you look at MTC documentation, you find out what their real agenda is. This is a document that I found that was printed the day before the MTC hearings to discuss the results. And they say that the priority development area has a strong emphasis on social equity and a housing needs reallocation called the 175% income redistribution, which is the primary method of social equity built into land use scenarios. This is wealth redistribution. And in fact, we found on one of their slides when they were presenting the results, this is exactly taken from their slide. They define the 175% income redistribution as the allocation of a higher percentage of low-income housing to cities with disproportionately low numbers of low-income residents. What they're trying to do is take low-income residents and move them into areas of high-income people. This is social engineering, wealth redistribution. Unfortunately, in California, it's the law. We have AB 32, which is California's cap and trade. We have SB 375, our greenhouse gas emissions quota. We have SB 214, the regionalization of redevelopment. It's the law, but is it really about the environment, as they say? We say no, because if you look at the documentation about smart growth and sustainability, you will see it includes the 3 E's: environment, economy, and equity. Smart growth policies promote land use regulations that force Americans into denser living arrangements. They curtail your freedom of choice in housing. They promote class warfare. They compel people to pay more for their homes. They want you to give up your cars in favor of subways, trolleys, buses. They use the term social equity. It's been defined as one of these organizations out of Southern California as the fair distribution of costs and benefits of government policy decisions across groups that make up a community. When those groups are defined in terms of income, race, or ethnicity, it is referred to as vertical equity, also termed environmental justice. So we are using social equity, sustainable development, and smart growth to restructure American life, to shift your attitudes, to coerce individuals to give up their personal wants for the needs of the community. And I quote from a member of ICLEI, individual rights will have to take a back seat to the collective in the process of implementing sustainable development. What they've done is they've taken America's sense of fairness and they're trying to guilt us into giving up our rights for the greater good. As Cass Sunstein would say, first we nudge, then we shove, then we shoot. Would you have voted for this? No. This is a stealth subversion of your property rights through sustainable development and smart growth policies. And again, it's stealthy. They use language and assumptions to get you to buy into a false premise. They use what I call the many facets of justice: social justice, transportation justice, environmental justice, social equity, media justice, everything but equal justice. Our country was founded on equal justice. Our country was founded on the concept that justice is blind and the law is applied equally to no matter who you are, rich or poor, standing in front of that judge. This has totally been turned upside down in the Alice in Wonderland looking glass world of sustainable development and smart growth. So I want to tell you what their code words are and ask you to keep your ears open for these words, because when you hear these words, red flags should go off in your mind. Smart growth, smart streets, visioning, consensus, urbanist communities, public-private partnerships, historical preservation, sustainable communities, open spaces, walkable communities, sustainable, name your town, multi-use dwellings, greenways, high-density urban developments, and buffer zones. Okay, let's talk about terminology. Our opponents like to call us the sprawl people, and they like to show you pictures like this. Who wants all that traffic? I have another vision of sprawl. This is sprawl over here on the right-hand side, a suburban house with property. This is anti-sprawl on the left, high-density housing. I would tell these people they're in favor of vertical sprawl. So the language is very important, and let me explain to you why I say that. Sustainable development is really subsidized development. There is no way this can work without taxpayers subsidizing it. Smart growth is high-density housing, mass transit, and land use control. New urbanism is smart growth. Open land preservation is habitat, no humans allowed. Affordable housing is subsidized housing. Equity is the redistribution of wealth. Social justice is the opposite of equal justice under the law. Visioning is a process of attaining consensus. Consensus is a phony agreement to a predetermined outcome. If you remember what I showed you earlier on the visioning sessions, they really gave you no choice. The choices were in a very, very narrow limit that would always point to the same outcome. We are being railroaded. We are being herded. We are being sheeple. Stakeholders. These are people or groups that have no legal interest in property. And I'm going to come back to that term because it's a really critical term. It's a red flag term. You need to know about it. Let me come back to sustainability. Sustainability, who doesn't want clean air, clean water, better life for your kids? The question is, how is that best achieved? And if you ask these people, they will say government control. So I call this the dark side of sustainability. It's big government central planning, it's behavior modification through government mandate, it establishes social justice, and it redistributes wealth. This is not about the environment. This is control and social engineering. Sustainability has been hijacked. It's an attack on capitalism. It's blame America. It's transfer wealth. It's impinge on constitutional rights. It's install a government to redistribute income. It follows the United Nations paradigm, interestingly enough. Capitalism and private property rights are not sustainable and pose the greatest single threat to the world's economy. Another way to look at sustainability is to ask what is unsustainable. Single-family homes, private transportation, private property, land use for recreation like golf courses, ski runs. As Maurice Strong, who was one of the founders of Agenda 21, said, current lifestyles and consumption patterns for the affluent middle class involving high meat intake, use of fossil fuels, appliances, home and work air conditioning, and suburban housing are not sustainable. So what are we talking about when we talk about open space? You'll hear this a lot. That was one of the questions we were asking. Do we want to preserve open space? That sounds really great to most people on a very high level. But open space is really no humans allowed. It is the rural counterpart of smart growth.
Environmental groups have effectively created a public image as organizations caring for helpless species and protecting environments. This has allowed them to implement an agenda in America that, if fully exposed, would be opposed by the majority of the people. In fact, most people supporting these organizations are not aware of their long-term objective, even though it is no secret. Take a look at the wildlands map. It defines where environmentalists want to take America in the very near future. The areas in red will be off limits to humans. The areas in yellow represent buffer zones, where limited use is allowed primarily to travel to and from populated areas. The areas in green are where normal use by humans will be allowed. However, by the environmentalists' own admission, these normal use areas would be restricted. No one, not even the longtime opponents of the environmental movement, believed such a transforming agenda was possible. However, it is being implemented quickly through innocent-sounding programs that most Americans support. Wilderness areas, critical habitat for endangered species, wetlands, roadless areas, national heritage areas, and other restrictive programs are sold to the public as necessary to protect nature, or as assurance that Americans will always have a place to escape from the heavily populated cities. More inventive tools and programs, such as conservation easements, smart growth, open space, and greenlining, are being promoted as a way to control growth. What all these programs have in common is extinguishing the private property rights of American citizens and transferring the control of the property to elite land trusts or directly to the government. To help facilitate the environmental goals, the Clinton administration quietly created the Gap Analysis Program, or GAP for short. GAP divides the land into ecosystem regions and identifies the properties not yet under the control of state and federal governments. In other words, private property. These private holdings are then targeted for preservation by government agencies and land trusts through conservation easements, purchase, and condemnation. Private property is quickly being eliminated. It will not take the 80 to 100 years they originally projected to complete their task. Government data shows that only 6% of America's land mass is currently developed. Only 3% of America is classified as urban. The rest is still largely untouched by humans. The problem is not that our nation is being overdeveloped. The problem is as old as time. It is about who will own the land. Make no mistake, this battle is not about whether the land will be used, resources extracted, and wealth created, but by whom.
Okay, folks, if we allow this to continue, we are definitely going to be in the post-private property era in the United States of America. California just happens to be the canary in the coal mine. But for those who are not in California, this is coming to your area. So be very aware. What we're talking about here again, the visioning slide you missed. What you see on this slide on the right-hand side is the green eco-village. People live here. And on the other side, you see the open space. This is prohibited area. It's closed to humans. I want to point out in the Bay Area, we have an organization called Greenbelt Alliance. They have gone into every single county in the Bay Area and identified what they call properties at risk. Everything that's red in this slide and pink is highly at risk. What they mean by that is that these are properties that they don't control. These are properties that are in private hands that potentially could be developed, and they don't like that. So they have a concerted effort to grab up this area and make it open space, and it's in every single county in the Bay Area. Who benefits from all of this? Well, if you look at the documentation, the people that benefit are minorities, low-income people, mass transit riders, walkers, bikers, and unions. In fact, MTC proudly brags on their website that they selected 14 nonprofit community-based organizations to help engage low-income communities and communities of color in the Bay Area. They didn't ask taxpayers. They didn't ask automobile drivers to participate. They just asked the social equity group to participate. These are people that we call stakeholders. They're people who have no legal interest in your property, but have the potential of dictating the use of your property. They form coalitions. This happens to be an organization called Transform CA. They have a page, 150 coalitions, and if you look at the people that show up at these meetings, they are made up of groups like the Rail Alliance, the Community Association, the Bicycle Coalition, the Walking Coalition. Who's excluded from this process? Property owners, automobile drivers, truckers, taxpayers. In fact, MTC has a policy advisory council. Who's on that council? These are citizens who are supposed to advise MTC on policies. Well, they say right in their documentation, in the area of social equity, 9 members reflecting communities of color and issues affecting low-income communities or environmental justice. These are the people who sit on their advisory council. They also have a deal called public-private partnerships. Public-private partnerships are private businesses that have a special relationship with the government. They get tax breaks, they get limited liability, they get subsidized to build these high-density houses. People who are in a private free enterprise system are paying higher taxes, they're very limited in what they can do, and they don't get the contracts for these projects. And so if eventually what's going to happen is you're going to see capitalism disappear as more and more funds head towards the public-private partnerships. What we have is public officials, social equity groups, NGOs, foundations, and public-private partnerships colluding against business owners, employees, the people who pay the bills. This is a form of extortion. And so here I have a cartoon with MTC and ABAG shaking down the taxpayer, and the money's going into all of these various organizations. Let's look at the local threat. In San Jose, for example, they have a program called Envision San Jose 2040. You can go on there and you can read about the land use designation for your property. Who gave them the right to do that? The person who did that in San Jose has now moved up the road to Sunnyvale, and he's proposed a Horizon 2035 program for Sunnyvale. And what this consists of, it's several hundred pages, but a couple of the three worst places are open spaces. Provide the ability and access to outdoor space for recreation and social purposes, including access to public spaces on privately owned property. They talk about transit-oriented, higher-density, mixed-use development to put higher-density housings near the transit areas. And then probably the most egregious of all is they have a residential energy efficiency proposal that would require that homes built before 1990 have an energy audit before they can be sold that discloses energy and water. What's going to happen with these people in these homes? They're going to be required to comply before they can sell. So either they're going to have to reduce the price of their home, or they're going to have to take out a loan to have the work done and then sell the property. Livermore, downtown BART. They wanted to bring BART into the downtown area. It was scheduled to go along the freeway at 3 times the cost. It was going to destroy 81 homes, erode property values in the area. Who would do something like this? The city council proposed this. They wanted to spend $250,000 to hire a consultant to write a plan saying why this made sense. Well, it does make sense when the objective is high-density housing, transit villages, and mixed-income neighborhoods. It makes perfect sense. Doesn't matter what the cost is, we're social engineering here. Back to the issue of stakeholders, and I think this is a really important concept here. In Alameda County, they passed something called Measure D. It sets up an urban growth boundary. It basically tells people that if you're inside the urban growth boundary, you can develop. If you're outside the urban growth boundary, you can't. We have a rancher that was zoned outside the urban growth boundary. 1.7 million Alameda County voters voted to take his property and the property of ranchers and farmers in that area on Measure D and restrict it to being outside the urban growth boundary. His property went from a $7 million value to less than $1 million. Nobody paid him for that property. He still technically owns it. He can't build anything on it. He can't sell it to anybody. This is taking somebody's property rights without compensation. It is not eminent domain. It is worse than eminent domain. I encourage you to understand what's going on. This is tremendously terrible for our representative republic. So I call this is what democracy looked like. Everybody's talking about democracy these days. We are not a democracy. We are a representative republic. In a democracy, the majority can trample on individual rights, and that's exactly what happened with this Measure D. The rule of law was subverted. So I ask you, what is in your city plan, your county plan, your transportation plan? You need to find out. And I would say to those who say there's no money to do this, or don't worry, it's just a plan, it's not funded, the state is broke. The plan is the presumption. They will divert funds from police and fire and necessary services and put them into accomplishing these objectives. They provide an opening for lawsuits for noncompliance. Social justice groups will force the issue. For example, in Pleasanton, Urban Habitat got a $2 million lawsuit for Pleasanton not complying with their high-density housing requirements. Transform, another organization, sued MTC and ABAG over $70 million airport extension. They said, they gloated on their website, that BART was unable to comply with equity and race requirements, and that was why they won. Low-income people and people of communities of color are now able to shape where we go. And they bragged again on their website that it was a windfall for all. A windfall for all, but those who are paying us, who are paying the bill. And who's pushing this? Very wealthy, elite people and their useful idiots. Al Gore's always talking about big oil and big coal. Well, there's really big green. This is a worldwide movement. Lots of money's involved. Just in the Bay Area alone, we found over $2 billion worth of foundations that are pushing this agenda. And again, what are they doing? They're grabbing up land and they're making it off limits to people for development, for housing. And the sad reality of social equity, all these people they get to lobby for this, is that it's going to end up in the long term affecting the low-income people. They will never be able to afford a house. They will never be able to have a car. They will be forever consigned to mass transit. Those of us who are now considered middle income will be lumped into the, will be forced into the lower income environment, and the people who are very rich and the bureaucrats will all be happy on bureaucratic estates. Why is this happening? There's a roadmap for sustainability. And it is being pushed on us, supposedly voluntarily, by ICLEI. The I in ICLEI stands for international. It's the International Council of Local Environmental Initiatives. They knew that we were getting wise to them, so they've changed their name to Local Governments for Sustainability. This is a list of all of the organizations, all of the cities in California that have signed up. Unfortunately, California is the biggest supporter of ICLEI. Why ICLEI? It's a game of deception. And in fact, I will quote from one of President Clinton's advisors. He said, participating in a UN-advocated planning process would very likely bring out many who would work to defeat us. So we will call our process something else, such as comprehensive planning, growth management, or smart growth. And I want to tell everybody, both parties are involved in this. Both parties have been complicit in this. What happened initially with ICLEI was they knew they couldn't get this through Congress, so they and environmental groups said, we'll go around Congress, we'll go directly to local cities and local agencies. And that's what they started doing. Now Congress has gotten into the act with sustainable development policies and smart growth policies. So now we're completely surrounded and the Constitution is being shredded. And I can just give you one example of this. This is the EPA. They have a whole group called Environmental Justice, and they have a National Environmental Justice Advisory Council. What they're doing, in effect, is moving the control as much as possible to the region, state, and federal level. Why would they do this? You have no control. This is loss of control at the local level. This is getting away from grassroots government, which is the foundation of our country. And this slide shows that when the founders decided to make our country, they said the individual should have the most power, with the city government and the county government next. How many of you go to your city council meetings? How many of you know what's going on in your county? This is where the action is. Forget about the presidential elections. Watch what's happening in your city and your county. Pay attention to the assembly and the state elections. And the irony of all of this is when you look at smart growth, the reality is it does the opposite of what it says it's going to do. And there is a website called the American Dream Coalition. I urge you to go to that website because they have on the right-hand side, if you go to that website, you will see that there's a thing that you can click on that says Smart Growth Disasters. And they have all of the statistics for San Jose, Cincinnati, and Portland, where they've been trying to implement smart growth for over 20 years, and what a disaster it has been. Here's one example in San Jose. Housing prices doubled when they started the smart growth policies. They put in a mass light rail system at tremendous expense. They could have built 4 6-lane freeways, and they didn't. They put in this light rail system. Hardly anybody rides it. It's low. It takes less than 7% of the commuting population. They could have invested that if they were a smart business. They would have invested that in roads. Another interesting thing about San Jose, they're one of the worst cities in the state in terms of sustainability implementation. They won an award from Siemens, happens to be one of those public-private partnership companies that stands to benefit from smart growth. Siemens gave them the 2011 Sustainability Community Award, which was $4 billion in venture capital funding for clean energy would create 25,000 clean jobs. They said they had 4,000 already created since 2007. That was before Solyndra went bankrupt and deleted 1,000 jobs. So if you just take the optimistic idea that they're going to have 25,000 clean jobs divided by $4 billion, that's $1.6 million a job. Is that sustainable? So how did this happen? To paraphrase the 60s, what if they gave a war and nobody came? Well, I'm here to tell you there is a war and nobody from our side is showing up and we are losing. People from organizations like Transform CA, and there are going to be others in your area, you have to research and look it out, are there and they go to these meetings. They show up with signs like this: I support the equity scenario. If you're a public official and you see a bunch of people in the audience with these signs and nobody standing up for private property rights, what are you going to do?
Good morning, and thank you very much for the opportunity to address you this morning. Thank you for the progress that has been made over the last several months. I want you to pause for a moment and see how many people in the audience are supporting the equity standalone agenda. We are doing this because we believe deeply in One Bay Area.
I just want to pause this here. If you see the people with the yellow shirts, you will see that they have a sign that says ACCES. That stands for Alliance of California Communities. They are ACORN.
We believe the voices of those who have been left out for the last 20 or 30 years in the metropolitan planning transportation process need to be brought into it, and we believe everyone should have the right to access to information that will give us the best alternative. We strongly support the notion of creating opportunities for people who are now marginalized in areas that have good schools and great jobs. We strongly support the economic opportunities that can be created. We strongly support an economic agenda for the social equity, for the equity process, and for the sustainable communities process. So we urge you to vote for both the standalone social equity scenario, and if necessary, replacing the fifth scenario, which is an outer expansion scenario, with the equity scenario, which will actually provide opportunity for people who live in the region to get access to opportunities that they don't have now. So we urge you to support the standalone scenario and possibly replacing the fifth scenario with that one. Thank you.
Okay, and Nancy Pelosi brought home the bacon. She got $5 million for sustainable communities in the Bay Area, and she says right in her plan, this plan is built with and by undeserved communities who will sit with policy experts and government agencies to steer the implementation process. Is anybody asking you? Okay, this is the vision of the Bay Area sustainability people. Like those houses? Okay, I want to pause here. The agenda that's happening right now covers many levers, and we can't attack everything right now. But education will be the next area that we need to be focused on. This is in the schools. Talks here about sustainability, education, permeates every school curriculum. And you'll find kids coming home talking to you about green, smart growth, sustainability, how we need to do this to save the planet. They want 1 million acres of open space in the Bay Area. Open space is usually somebody's private property. Like those cars? This gentleman is Van Jones, President Obama's former green job czar. This is Hillary Clinton. Her husband instituted the President's Council for Sustainable Development. Ah, utopia. It has arrived. And here are all of the organizations that have supported this sustainability agenda. I want to point out here, these are the same organizations that are lobbying MTC and ABAG. What do you think the date is of this sustainability video? March 30th, 2008. And they are here now in 2011 asking us for public input on the plan. What I want to come across to you, if nothing else comes across to you today, is the fact that smart growth and sustainable development are driving a nail in the coffin of liberty. This is a very serious issue, and we all need to be aware of it and start taking action. What can you do? Get off the couch. Voting and paying taxes is not enough. You have to show up. I want to use as an example Santa Rosa. She wrote a book called Behind the Green Mask. It talks about the efforts that she did with concerned citizens. They went into their city, they got local business owners involved, they looked at their plan, they said this is not something that we want. They had a core group of activists, they organized, they fundraised, they educated the community through flyers, they appeared at City Hall, they had articles in the paper, and they prevailed. What can you do? Educate yourself, know the code words, understand the techniques involved to subvert your voice, question the assumptions. Start or join a county property rights task force. Start at the county level, and then as you get more groups of people together, then you can have city level groups. Withdraw from one Bay Area plan if you're in the Bay Area, or whatever your regional plan is. Get your city to get out of ICLEI. If your city isn't in ICLEI, your county probably is. Monitor city, county, and regional governments. Send letters. Show up. Our language is the language of sustainable liberty. We are community organizing for the Constitution. I have a website, it's bayarealiberty.com. You can go there. There are usually take action items. You can join to keep up to date with what's going on in the Bay Area. When I think about how I'm going to present this to people that don't know anything about it, I want to use this poem. First they came for the ranch land and the farmland, and I did not speak out because I like open space, bike paths, and hiking trails. Then they came for the water, and I didn't speak out because I was not on a lake or a river. Then they came for the airport, and I did not speak out because I was not an airplane owner or a pilot. Then they came for my house, and there was no one left to speak out for me. I urge you, especially if you are in an area where you have a lot of rural and suburban communities, that you get together with your ranchers and farmers and you support them, because otherwise the government at all levels will pick them off one at a time, and that's why they have been so successful. So your voice needs to be heard to stand up for them before there's no one left to stand up for you.
The only reason we found out about this is because there are citizens paying attention to what is going on in their own local communities. We have been paying attention to Washington. We must stand guard on our own communities. Some people now have begun questioning and standing up to what on the surface seems like a harmless initiative just to save the environment. But it is not. Be awake. Spread the word. Watch your local community. The answer will be found with the individual. The answers and the solutions will be found in the local communities. But once they put their fangs into our communities, they'll suck all the blood out of it, and we will not be able to survive. Watch out. I told you before, and boy, was I hammered for this. I know now why. When I first warned you about a year and a half ago, watch the words social justice. It's like I said last night, Princess Bride. You keep using those words. I do not think it means what you think it means. They don't. Social justice. A lot of people interpret that in, it's what God wants me to do. Yes. But God wants you to render to Caesar that which is Caesar's. Jesus never said, take the coat off of your back and then give it to the government and have him divide it up and give it to other people. No, that's for us to do. Look for the buzzwords social justice and look for the buzzwords sustainable development. Some people involved may actually have a pure heart and believe in it the way you do. Most do not. Those who want more government controls are never going to come out and say it. They've got to trick you into it. But the more you follow the usual suspects, the more you'll recognize their hallmarks, and the more you can ring the bell and protect your own community.
I want to say to everybody out there, I realize that for a lot of people, Glenn Beck is a controversial figure. I would ask you to listen to his words. Listen to the message, not the messenger. I think no truer words have been spoken. We need to be watching what's happening locally and get involved in our communities and stop this assault on our liberty and our property rights. So act locally. Don't surrender your property rights and freedom to a small group of people who are using crisis and fear-mongering to ask us to subsume our individual liberties for the good of the community in order for the planet to survive. This is a false choice. Individual stewardship of private property has always been a better protection of the environment. Who are the two worst polluters in the world? The two worst industrial polluters in the world are China and Russia, where the property is not owned privately. And unfortunately, what's happening with us is federal grant money and compliance with smart growth policies and sustainable development is going to ensure that our economic slavery. So if you're involved in your local city council and they want to take some grant money, the answer is no. There are always strings attached. And usually when you get down the road, you will find these strings and it's too late. People ask me about Agenda 21. Does that term really matter? And my comment is, yes, this is Agenda 21, but if you're first approaching somebody, these people have been brilliant in their marketing strategy. On the one hand, they use the term, and on the other hand, if the opposition uses it to point out a problem, they can deny it. They have plausible deniability to say, well, you're a bunch of crazy people. So my advice to people, if you want to get involved in this issue, is to start from the concept of property rights. At some point, yes, you might end up back into a conversation about Agenda 21. But if you talk about property rights, sustainable development, smart growth, and ICLEI, all of those terms are being used in local communities. You can make that case. You can show people exactly where that's happening. You can show them some of the cartoons about what these terms really mean to them. So I always, back to Star Wars, I always tell people, if they say Agenda 21, these are not the droids you're looking for. Because if you start with Agenda 21, a lot of people are just going to turn you off. And what we need to do is reach out beyond our communities that are currently interested in this message to other groups. In fact, there's a group in the North Bay called Democrats Against Agenda 21. So we need to reach out to all political parties, all affiliations, and get more people recruited to understand what's going to happen. Because property rights affects everybody. It doesn't matter who you are. It will affect you, and it will affect your children and grandchildren. We will end up being economic slaves. So some closing thoughts. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, he was one of the few people who stood up to Hitler in Germany. And unfortunately, he stood up too late. By the time people realized what was really going on, it was too late. And he said, "Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act." We need to speak. Everybody needs to speak. Everybody needs to act. This is entrenched in our government at all levels. And the only way this is going to get turned around is if enough people understand what's going on, wake up their fellow citizens, and start complaining about what's happening and taking action. I hope for everybody that this is just the beginning of a journey, and that I'm speaking to you a couple years from now in a free America. Thank you.